All right, Joe. We're behind a 65-7 Georgia just drubbing and gigging of TCU. And now we move on to the NFL playoffs where you don't see beatdowns like this very often. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
And on Dan Joe Sports Show, now we're doing our NFL preview. And I want to start with a team that's very similar to Georgia and actually has a quarterback that a lot of people are comparing to Stetson Bennett, and that's the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Seahawks at home. And Joe, before we analyze this game, I did want to think to myself, with Brock Purdy now being a starting quarterback in the NFL and seeing what Stetson has done, this season he ends up having over 4,000 passing yards. As you mentioned in the last show, he was the MVP of all four college football playoff games he played in, back-to-back national champion, Heisman Trophy finalist. Don't you think that if a team gets to about the fourth or the fifth round and they need some quarterback depth, that he's a worthwhile draft pick, Stetson Bennett? I would be fine with it, even if the Saints did that.
I think he could be. I think he'd be great, for the locker room. Seems like he'd be a good leader. And I feel like a lot of your great quarterbacks, by and large, with few exceptions, are not drafted number one overall or even the top five. You get a lot of guys who are in later rounds.
Tom Brady, obviously the best example, but Russell Wilson wasn't until I think the fifth round, maybe. Obviously, Dak Prescott.
Drew Brees were both second-round picks.
Mm-hmm. So, and he's got a lot more abilities than people think. I think he's got a good arm. It's not the best deep ball arm, but he is so much faster than people give him credit for. I heard that he runs a 4.5, and that's a pretty fast, time right there. And he's got some good quick twitch to him, too, where he can shake tackles a lot easier than you think. So, I think there's a lot more athletic ability there than people want to give him credit for.
Mm-hmm. There really is. But fascinating, with his age, he is older than Brock Purdy, who will be starting this game.
That's interesting. Well, Brock Purdy at this point, I think he's still undefeated as a starting quarterback, right? Like coming in for Jimmy Garoppolo. And, it just seems like it's crazy to me that Garoppolo, there's been so many, coups to overthrow him. They go out and draft Trey Lance. He never gets to play. Meanwhile, Garoppolo has like one of the best winning percentages in the NFL over the past 10 years. And Brock Purdy, I think, is proving to everyone that when you have that defense that San Francisco has, you can just plug in a quarterback.
It seems that way. They may be the front runner in the NFC, even though Philly's the one seed, just the way they played at the end of the season on fire. And Purdy was kind of plug and play with that defense. Christian McCaffrey added at the trade deadline. So a lot to like. And we'll see what they do in the offseason with their quarterback situation. But on the flip side, Dan, Seattle is fascinating with the fact that they trade Russell Wilson, get all these first-round picks in return, like a king's ransom. And then with Geno Smith, they still make the playoffs as the 7 seed. So they just pulled off maybe one of the best trades of all time if we look back at it in a few years and see how things go. And, they're going to be set up to take on their arch rival, the 49ers, in this matchup.
How satisfied are you right now if you're a Seahawks fan that you get rid of Russell Wilson? All he's done is complain about how you never support him over the last 5 years. My offensive line's terrible. You don't ever help me out. Not saying he's wrong, by the way. I'm just saying this is what he was doing. And you get rid of him. You get all these first-round draft picks. You have Geno Smith, who the last time he started a game was, 8 years ago? He's somebody that I even forgot was in the NFL. But he was someone that I always liked. And you make the playoffs, and meanwhile, the Broncos are at home, and they fire their coach. And people are making jokes that Russell Wilson has more rooms in his house than touchdown passes this year.
Yeah, that's the case. And Geno Smith actually topped him for the most passing yards in a season by a Seattle quarterback this year. And then also Geno Smith made the Pro Bowl. And so, what a luxury to have him on the team. It's worked out perfectly for Pete Carroll this year, kind of re-energized his career to a degree. And I don't think they're going to win this game against the 49ers, but I think it's more of a celebration for them making the playoffs, which I'm still shocked they did it instead of the Packers. How about the Lions knocking off the Packers the other night? That's a big win for them, loss for Green Bay. But I think the 49ers probably win this by a couple of scores, but, definitely a big story for Seattle.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if this was a game where Seattle was hosting, I would be very worried about the 49ers losing it because that Seattle atmosphere in playoffs is lit. I mean, we've seen the Saints go in and lose to a 7-9 Seattle team there before because of how daunting that environment can be. I don't think that Seattle's going to win this game. I mean, San Francisco's defense is just too good, and Geno Smith has had a very good year, but he's still someone that is not good enough to beat this defense.
Mm-hmm. Right. I agree. So, yeah, I'm going to say San Francisco wins like 31-14, 28-14, something in that range.
Yeah, Joe, I think Seattle's going to show a little pride and play hard for Pete Carroll, but I think I'm going to take the 49ers 31-20 in this one.
Okay. I can see that.
Joe, moving on to maybe the game that I'm the most excited about of Wild Card Weekend, just because it's teams that I'm not used to seeing in the playoffs with really young, exciting quarterbacks, the Chargers and the Jaguars. I'm an unashamed, huge fan of Sunshine. I love Trevor Lawrence. I've been a huge fan of him since day one. Maybe it was because he destroyed Alabama in the national championship. That's what made me happy about him. But I've just always kind of liked him. He's got a cool style to him. He's amazing. And, for a while there, I thought he was going to go down as the greatest college football quarterback in history. He needed to beat Joe Burrow to do it, and he didn't do that. So I think that didn't happen. And now I think if you want to talk about more accomplished quarterbacks, maybe even Stetson Bennett could say he's more accomplished than Trevor Lawrence. I mean, there's an argument there.
Yeah.
But Trevor Lawrence is what I thought was the best quarterback I've seen in college. And I thought that he would get it done with the Jaguars. Now, he had a lot of growing pains. Last season with Urban Meyer, things just got weird. There was a lot of bad energy right there in Jacksonville. And you kind of thought that, we just didn't want them to give up on him. You knew that it was going to get there. And now you're looking at them. They're in the playoffs after that just dumpster fire of season last year. And the Chargers, meanwhile, things were a lot better start for Herbert. Last season, it was kind of like the Chargers just kept losing all these one-score games over and over again, and they couldn't get over the hump in the tight ones, but you saw the talent that was there with Herbert. I mean, we remember that we had Jim Nagy on our show, the executive director of the Senior Bowl, and he said that Justin Herbert was the most talented quarterback he's ever evaluated.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I remember that. And that was certainly stood out to me at the time. It's made me always kind of watch Herbert, with more interest after that with his career. And I think that with this matchup, it's the quarterback matchup. It's the teams that aren't used to making the playoffs that often. I think it's also the contrast in coaches. I look at Doug Pederson, who was a Super Bowl winning coach, used to be with the Eagles, now with the Jaguars. He's worked wonders with Trevor Lawrence, offensive-minded guru. And on the flip side, you've got Brandon Staley, who's a former defensive coordinator with the Rams. And he's kind of, in many ways, probably coaching for his job because there's a lot of pressure on him with the Chargers kind of barely making the playoffs. A lot of people were expecting them maybe to compete with the Chiefs in the AFC West division. So I think a really interesting matchup, and I think a matchup that's probably going to come right down to the wire.
Yeah, Joe, I think this is definitely going to be – this is pretty much a coin flip game. Obviously, the home atmosphere means nothing for the Jaguars because they're known to have the lamest home atmosphere in all of the NFL. Now, I know with Trevor Lawrence coming, it's been a little bit more exciting there. I like the coaching advantage that Jacksonville has. I really like the way that Trevor Lawrence is playing right now. And I think their defense has really kind of come on this year and been one of the strengths of this team. And so I think I'm going to take Jacksonville to win this game.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm leaning to. And I think that the weapons that have emerged for Jacksonville, you think about Evan Ingram's had a career year at tight end, resurgence. And I just think that there's something about that cross-country flight for LA having to go all the way to Jacksonville. And I just feel like everything's kind of aligned for Jacksonville to be able to pull this out.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a big win for him and a start to really turning around Trevor Lawrence's career and getting him up to where we think he should be as an NFL quarterback.
And they've been one of the hottest teams in the NFL down the stretch, overtaking the Titans, who just fell apart.
Yeah, I mean, what an epic collapse that was. That the Titans were up like 4 games ahead of Jacksonville with 4 to go. And they had to come in the very last game of the season and take on the Jags, and they lost that one too. And that's how the Jacksonville got in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think they lost 6 straight to end the season, maybe.
Which is crazy because, I mean, the last couple of years, they've been a team that, I think there was a year, I think it was last year, I picked the Titans to win the Super Bowl. This year, I considered them among one of my top 5 favorites, and they just fell apart. And they looked to be a great team for a lot of the year. Really solid defense. Of course, Derrick Henry is the best running back in the NFL. They got I guess they got rid of AJ Brown, which has been a big deal. And Tannehill is just falling off the face of the planet. Malik Willis hasn't quite reached the expectations. And it all came down to the fact that they had to take on Jacksonville with Josh Dobbs as quarterback, who I thought Dobbs was great at Tennessee and always someone that I wanted to see have a chance, in the NFL. But it seems like maybe his time has passed and it wasn't, quite what we thought it would be.
Yeah, I mean, he, give him credit for making it close against Jacksonville in that environment, with that pressure. But yeah, definitely a collapse by the Titans, and the Jaguars benefited. And now I think they've got a good chance to advance to the next round.
Absolutely. Joe, moving on to what I think is the biggest mismatch of the postseason right here that we have. And my lock of the week, I don't even know what the line is, but whatever it is, just bet on the Bills. I mean, this is going to be a brutal beatdown. I hate it because Tua has had such a great season when he's been in there. We know about all the concussions, and it seems like each time he gets in the game, it happens again. And now he's not going to be able to play in this game against the Bills, and the Dolphins have 0 chance to win this game.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much about this game that just seems like it's no chance to be good. I mean, even the start time, it's like a noon kickoff. A lot of people won't be watching. And so, yeah, I just think Bills just in a rout.
Yeah. I'm going to take the Bills 65-7.
Yeah, we'll see if they top that. Yeah.
It's going to be closer to 65-7 than it is to anything else, though. That's how bad this game's going to be.
And the cold weather aspect, Miami having to go with Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, think about what we saw with Buffalo just last month, where, I got to experience a pseudo white Christmas in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And while I was having that, they had one of the most brutal nor'easters I've ever seen in Buffalo, where you had tidal waves and just brutal snow. And I mean, people couldn't even drive for days. And that's what Miami's going up to. And Miami, it's what? Even in the dead of, December, it's still 85 degrees outside. This is going to be a miserable game for them.
I think so.
Which we're talking about domes, Joe. Out of all the teams in the NFL that doesn't have a dome, why on earth does Buffalo not have one?
I don't know. I think there's something about their fan base that enjoys watching football or being around football in that environment. I think that it's kind of I was talking to somebody from Buffalo a few months ago. I think that they have, they are who they are, I guess.
So maybe instead of being the Bills Mafia, they should be the Bills Masochists.
But now that you mention it, I want to say I read that they are building a new stadium soon. So maybe they are going to have a retractable roof. I don't know.
I would hope so. I mean, after what I saw, I couldn't even believe what I was seeing with this weather, where it was like snow like 10 feet in the air and mixed with flooding that was happening. And there was no power, no way to drive anywhere. I was like, and they play football outside? I mean, it's crazy to me. I think I was reading something that the players had to walk to practice with all the stuff going on.
I believe it. I could see that being grueling.
And then they still had to play outside after all that. So, I mean, credit to Buffalo fans for being tough, but man, that just seems miserable.
It really does. No doubt.
All right, Joe. Speaking of a team that's had a lot of rough times lately, but had a really good first year, the Giants are taking on the Vikings in Minnesota. Minnesota does have a dome, which is good because it's also quite frigid there too. Been an interesting team. The Giants were really great earlier in the season. I think Daniel Jones has definitely exceeded a lot of my expectations he had as an NFL quarterback. The Vikings have been one of the best teams in the NFC. Kirk Cousins continues to have a very good yeoman career as kind of like someone that's always in the upper middle echelon of NFL quarterbacks, but someone that's had a lot of success, especially since he's been with the Vikings. And this would be an interesting game right here.
I think so. And they played each other, I think it was on Christmas Eve a few weeks ago, and Minnesota won 27-24. And I think they kicked a 61-yard field goal as time expired. And that's kind of, Dan, been the mantra of the Vikings all season, playing really, really close games. They had the maybe game of the year against Buffalo earlier in the season when Justin Jefferson had the one-handed catch that was just unreal. And they narrowly won that game in overtime. And so all year, I feel like Minnesota's kind of been playing with fire. I feel like I have to pick some road upsets in this first round in the wild card. And so I think that we're going to see that potentially here with the Giants. I think that it's the close calls for Minnesota all year that finally comes back to bite them. And then I also think that the Giants, the running game with Barkley, I think Jones will be steady enough to win, avoid turnovers. And I think that the Giants are able to pull this out at Minnesota.
Joe, this is one where I've been struggling a lot with it. I'm going to take the home team just by a little bit, mostly because I like the tradition that the Vikings have, and I want to go to a Vikings game really bad now because I didn't realize they blew a Viking horn before the game started, and that special people get to do it. Auburn Cindy Lee, who's a Minneapolis native, got to blow the Viking horn for a game this year.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen them do that sometimes in the pregame.
And now that I've seen that, I really want to go to a game. But, despite that, I like Dalvin Cook. I like their ability to run it. Justin Jefferson has just been playing amazing at wide receiver. Kirk Cousins, I mentioned he's in this upper middle tier. He seems to play really good during the playoffs, especially in tight games too. And Daniel Jones hasn't been in the playoffs yet. The Vikings is a tough place to play, especially in the first round. They seem to win these games. I'm going with history. I'm going with experience, and I'm going to go with the Vikings in this.
Well, it's definitely a big game for the Vikings because I think, if they could get through this, they have as good a chance as anybody to win the NFC. And so I think, big expectations for them.
Yeah. Joe, speaking of big expectations, the Bengals get to host the Ravens for a first-round playoff game. In one that's really exciting because that's a big rivalry. I think it's kind of a dirty one. These teams don't like each other. And Joe, if it wasn't for the fact that Lamar Jackson was hurt, this would be a game that maybe would be the most exciting to me of the week one playoff matchups. But not having Lamar Jackson in this game just really takes away a lot from it.
It really does. And I know that, John Harbaugh will come out, as a Super Bowl winning coach and put forth a good game plan that they'll probably, make some plays and their defense will have their moments. But I just think in the second half, you'll see Burrow and Chase and company, they'll just pull away. And I think that you'll see the Bengals, win at home by a couple of touchdowns.
Yeah, Joe, I like the Bengals big in this game too. Without Lamar Jackson, I just don't think that the Ravens offense is dynamic enough to hang in this game. Of course, they have a great defense. But one thing that makes the Bengals a team to me this year that I actually like even more than last year is the way they began the season. They went 0-3 to begin the year, took a lot of head punches to begin the season, had to reevaluate themselves. And since that happened, they've shown how good they are. It kind of reminds me of what happened with Georgia and Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State should have won that game, and they didn't, though. And Georgia got the second lease on life, and they came out and they obliterated TCU. Well, that's kind of where the Bengals have been. They started off the season where they go 0-3. Their playoff dreams and their chances of winning the Super Bowl, which they got so close last year, seem to be fading. But they tightened their resolve, and they've been one of the most dominant teams in the NFL since that time.
They really have been. Credit to them for turning it around. Most teams, when they start out 0-2, just aren't able to do that in the NFL.
That's right. The worry that I would have is yet again the offensive line. I don't think that's going to get them in this one. The Ravens do have, of course, a great defensive line, and they always will, but there's just not enough offense. And that's going to be something we're going to watch during the postseason to see if the Bengals are ready to beat a team that has an elite defensive line when it matters.
Yeah, they're probably going to be matched up with the Bills if both of them win the very next week. And so that will be, the test.
Yeah, that'll be the test. And man, that'll be must-see TV right there.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, speaking of must-see TV, this last game is one that you could definitely put at the top of the list in terms of games this weekend. You're not seeing the young guns like what I've seen with the Chargers and the Jags, but there's a lot of interest in this one. The Dallas Cowboys traveling to the Bucs to take on Tom Brady. On paper, Joe, the Cowboys should win, and they should win big. This Bucs team has not been a playoff team on paper with the way they do anything, but it's just been the magic at the end of the games. You talking about the Vikings living by the skin of their chinny chin chin. How about the Bucs lately? I mean, every week it seems like they're down by double digits in the fourth quarter, and Tom Brady engineers just magic to win games for them. And there's nothing about their team that looks particularly good except for Tom Brady. And lately, Mike Evans has reawoken because he was asleep for a lot of the season. And that's what makes the Bucs scary, is that suddenly you see Mike Evans getting back at it.
That's right, Dan. And, he quietly had over 1,200 receiving yards this season. Every year of his career, he's had over 1,000 yards, so quietly. And Tom Brady, we talk about how their offense struggled this year. He quietly throws for 4,600 yards on the season. And so, the capability is there for this team to break out in the playoffs one step at a time. We know they can do it. I think that the compelling thing about this matchup, as you alluded to previously, is that I think there's a chance that we could see some ratings in a non-Super Bowl go through the roof as far as some records broken, because this is a dream for the NFL and ABC and ESPN, because you've got the Dallas Cowboys and Tom Brady facing off. And that's like the biggest media draw in the NFL, is both of those two things. And you've got them playing each other in the playoffs with the pressure on Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy, and then what could be Tom Brady's last game to add to the storylines. And so I just think we're set up for just an epic showdown. I feel like this game is going to be really close. I feel like the Cowboys will probably win, but boy, I think they're going to have to work for it. I kind of see Tampa Bay leading this game like most of the night, maybe like being up like 16-10 in the fourth quarter. And you see the Cowboys have to get like a late touchdown to maybe win by 17-16. I think they're going to win by just like on the hair on their chins.
And Joe, in all those storylines you're mentioning, there's an additional one too, and that's Kellen Moore. I'm hearing that Kellen Moore is being interviewed by multiple NFL teams for their head coaching job. So obviously, in order for you to beat Tom Brady, you got to have your offense playing their best football. It's going to be interesting to see where the focus is at right now, with Kellen Moore likely being 88 and out the gate at the end of the season.
Yeah, that could definitely be a distraction. And then the other weird stat I was thinking about, Dan, the Bucs have a losing record. Every example I can think of where a team with a losing record won their division and hosted a playoff game,
they win that first game.
They won the first game. So, I mean, upset alert if you're the Cowboys.
Absolutely. Joe, I cannot bet against Tom Brady in the first round of the playoffs when he has a home game. I look at what they've done at the end of the games in the last month. I mean, and they were just dead over and over again. He kept reviving them. They're down 13 points against the Saints with 4.5 minutes left. Easily gets 2 touchdowns. They're down at the end of the game against the Cardinals. He gets the field goal when it matters. And I think the Panthers, he did the same thing. And I mean, he's been playing some of the most clutch football of his career when his team around him hasn't been playing good. And as I said, all of a sudden, Mike Evans has really started playing some great football. Their defense has been excellent all season. And Joe, if we know one thing about the Dallas Cowboys, is that since the 90s, they've been the biggest choke artists in the playoffs of any team in the NFL. And they do it continually. Does Dak Prescott even won a playoff game yet?
Maybe one, but Tom Brady's 7-0 in his career against the Cowboys franchise.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it seems like every year we want to buy into America's team. And, the Cowboys have the greatest offense. Dak Prescott's throwing for 5,000 yards. But they get to this position in the playoffs and they don't win. And I just think that, maybe if they were taking on a team like maybe even the Vikings I would even consider giving the Cowboys an edge. Certainly if they were playing the Giants. Maybe even a team like, if they were playing Seattle or maybe even San Francisco, but this is Tom Brady to me. I just don't see him losing this game. And I don't see the Cowboys shoving all this 25 years of misery in the postseason against the GOAT. So I gotta go with Tom Brady in the Bucs to win. And then you add in the fact that just like what you talked about, these teams that have losing records that win their division and get to host, they always have so much pride on the line and they win. I mean, I will never forget watching the Saints, who were 12-4 but didn't win their division, go to Seattle to take on a 7-9 Seattle team. And Marshawn Lynch has this beast mode run where he throws down like 5 different people, eats the Skittles afterwards, and they destroyed the Saints. I mean, they killed them. And it's like that. I don't know what it is, but I think that's what it is. I think it is the pride aspect of these losing teams that get to host first-round games after they win their division.
Yeah, it's really crazy how it's worked out that way historically. And then I think also Tom Brady's looking at it like, yeah, we're 8-9, but we're in the playoffs now, and we have as good a chance as anybody. He's not scared of any of these NFC quarterbacks. I mean, when you're comparing him to Kirk Cousins and Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy and Dak Prescott, he's not scared a bit.
No, I mean, there is no quarterback in the NFC that can hold his water bucket right now. Now maybe you get him in a game in the Super Bowl against a Patrick Mahomes or a Joe Burrow or a Josh Allen, and those guys now are playing football that's better than Tom Brady. But all these guys in the NFC, none of them can be as consistent as Tom Brady, and I would not favor any of them in a one-possession game at the end against him.
I mean, there's a reason why I think he went to Tampa 3 years ago. He knew that Breeze was about to retire. Aaron Rodgers was getting closer. I mean, he knew that this was going to be his conference potentially.
I think that's a good point. Joe, speaking of moving on, I did want to mention earlier, there's a lot of rumors right now about Jim Harbaugh, if the Broncos don't hire Sean Payton, him being their number one choice. We've seen Harbaugh go to the semifinals of the college football playoff 2 years in a row. It's coming off maybe the most disappointing loss of his career as a Michigan coach. Do you think he jumps, or do you think this really is the destination job for him?
I feel like he's probably going to the NFL this year. Now, I thought last year there was a chance the Vikings were looking at him before they decided to go after Kevin O'Connell. But this year to me feels a little bit different, where I could see him going to the NFL this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's just hard for me because he played at Michigan. He's gotten him back to such a great place, and he's got a chance to be, one of the most consistent coaches in America, and he's beaten Ohio State 2 years in a row. But you wonder if it seems like he still always gets flack no matter what he does. And now that he's lost to TCU, who people are just going to, they're going to poo-poo on because of what happened in that game against Georgia, you wonder if maybe he's just had enough.
Well, I did hear the date to wait for maybe like January 17th, so like next Tuesday or Wednesday, because I heard an interview with Sean Payton where, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think he can talk to anybody until January 17th. I don't know if it has something to do with him still being under contract with the Saints or what. Mm-hmm. But I think that we're going to see, if the Broncos want to talk to him first, and then if Harbaugh is the next candidate, we probably won't know anything until after that date.
Yeah, well, we'll be definitely checking it out because I think it's a fascinating story to me. I personally hope he remains at Michigan. I like having him in college football. I love what he's done with Michigan. I think at some point that maybe they'll have a year where they can win a national championship, and I would love to see it because I like Jim Harbaugh. He's weird, but I get it. It's like a weirdness that I like. And, I mean, it's consistent. It's cool, old-school football. I like how every year he has the best offensive line in America. And it's just a great throwback to what I think of when I thought of football growing up.
Well, I mean, I saw where Blake Corum's coming back next year, and he'll have J.J. McCarthy back if he decides to stay.
That's right. Well, we'll see. And we'll see y'all next week. You can check out all of our episodes on Spotify. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Dan and Joe Sports Show YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show. And, of course, you can like our Facebook fan page. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.